I want to start by saying that I've never presented at any conference ever. And I've written down this whole thing, even this bit, which is pretty uncool. Before I begin, I always also want to mention my lack of humour. When I was stressing to my mum about doing this presentation, her advice was, just be funny. But I'm not actually very funny, so thanks for that, Mum. When I was stressing about this to my brother, his advice was just to watch heaps of Steve Jobs, and then I'll just get it. Okay? And my husband's advice was to talk really slowly and just go off the beaten track. So that said, I'll start at the beginning to attempt to answer the question of what inspired me to get involved in community arts and cultural development. Like Steve Jobs, I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. In my case, it was the theatre. After studying theatre performance at Wollongong University, I spent a few years living in an artist community and struggling to survive as an actor in Sydney. I eventually reluctantly decided to do my dip ed and teach high school drama. I travelled over to Western Australia to do this study. So I'm a really idealistic person, which is going to come through really strongly in this. So I was easily switched on to the idea of teaching as some kind of romantic vocation, which is how it was sold to us at uni. However, the lens through which I viewed everything was the theatre. So when I was learning about these hot new education priorities, things like developing innovative and creative thinkers, student-centred task-based learning, and collaborative problem-solving, I felt super enthusiastic because I knew the theatre already taught this stuff. The theatre was the best way to develop these skills. My first teaching job in 2006 was in Gambier. I had family in the area and was from there originally, but had moved away over 10 years ago. Gambier was culturally light years away from Sydney or Fremantle. I suffered from serious culture shock as I adjusted to a place where major theatre events were Carl Barron or the local dancer Stedfords. I was shocked and outraged. Where was the theatre? I pretty much resigned myself to the fact that my career as an actor was over, but instead I'd taken on the role of some kind of hipster art torchbearer. My work teaching drama to high school students showed me that there were so many creative, enthusiastic, talented, imaginative kids in the southeast without any knowledge of or access to contemporary performance or art. It seemed that art was only valid when it was competitive. So there were no options outside the school curriculum other than lessons in preparation for exams or Stedfords. It was all about proficiency, not creativity. This brings me to a specific example of what inspired me to work in community arts and cultural development. Frances Smith, a 13-year-old girl who spent her lunchtimes directing her friends to perform scenes from Cats or Phantom of the Opera, word for word, exact choreography. I developed school curriculum where students made group devised work in response to a theatrical style. Performances made through this process were often really great and showed the eagerness and capacity of young people to express and present their ideas, concerns and imagination through performance. My first year 8 class, under the influence of the formidable Frances, presented the Phantom of the Opera in the style of Greek theatre. Just take a moment to imagine that, if you can. At some point in 2007, I think, it might have been 2008, I received an email from Steve Mayhew at Country Arts SA. He was the newly appointed creative producer for Local Stages Initiative, and his role was to promote the performing arts in Gambier. He was doing a general call out to meet people and was offering acting workshops with Gerald MacArthur in Gambier. I was like, yes, I'm in. When we met, I spoke to him about what I saw as an issue of opportunity. I wanted to provide opportunities for young people in Gambier to learn new skills and to make their own work. I was convinced that if more people just experienced theatre and art in different ways, we could invigorate Gambier. I thought that if young people developed and placed contemporary performance in public spaces, not only would the city have vitality breathed into it, but young people would begin to inhabit the city in a way which would position them as drivers, not just consumers or nuisances. I thought that free performances in public, high-traffic places would see accidental viewers of the work switched on to the power of the theatre. Yes, I was somewhat naive to the culture of the place I was living in. Talking with Steve Mayhew was like that improvisation exercise, Yes Let's, where you just have to say yes and see where it leads you. I think Steve might have played that a bit at uni. So Local Stages Initiative, that was Country Arts SA, supported me to set up and deliver workshops for people aged 7 to 13 to practice improvisation, along with a program of workshops for people 14 to 18 to make new work. In this work, I incorporated boal, dance and circus. We held our first show in the Cave Gardens in the middle of town, Virus Detected, where 20 young people moved the audience through the gardens, showing them small scenes and moments exploring computers and technology. Frances played the role of the cat. She had a lot of practice being a cat by the stage. She was amazing. We had fire twirling in the caves, craft work and Deltron 3030. We had lots of people come and watch, and the whole thing was a major buzz. So after this initial success, and with the assistance of Country Arts SA Local Stages, I set up Rising Down Youth Performing Arts. Steve Mayhew stepped me through the whole process, from introducing me to people working in youth arts, to working with me as I prepared to register the organisation. He was a sounding board as I planned my first program, providing me with questions to prepare me for applying for CAD funding from Arts SA. He spent about 8 hours with me budgeting that first 12-month program. Afterwards, he joined me for some typical Gambier social time at a friend's place. On this particular evening, my sister's dog decided to massacre my friend's chooks. It was an intense evening. Steve was in. The assistance I had from Local Stages preparing for this first program also set me up for success, not just in gaining that initial funding support, but also in delivering the program. This support and success inspired me to continue planning and administering projects that both interested me and addressed the interests of young Gambierians. Over the next 2 years, Rising Down delivered playwriting workshops, electronic music production and DJing workshops, and delivered new works for public performance. We made the site-specific hybrid work Focalize with Illuminate, dance theatre work Iris, and a viewpoints exploration which resulted in the physical theatre work I Am Here Waiting. We presented shows at the Coucil Festival, in a small black box space at Barco's Foundry, and in the local shopping centre car park. Frances graduated from Andrew Lloyd Webber Musicals to become a founding member of the Shaniqua Interpretive Dance Academy, who spent lunchtimes in the drama room freestyling with fabric to Barbara Streisand songs, or creating their epic interpretive dance work, High School Massacre. I'd walk into the drama room, there's red lights flashing and kids with chairs and on a desk. It was really very funny. Not very cool, but it was. She also developed her practice as a photographer and began documenting Rising Down performances. So now I'm just going to show you some photos from projects. Some of the photos were by Frances, but not all of them. This was the Coucil Festival in 2009, I think. And this is the following year. So these guys are they're doing open viewpoints, and they're inside a building, and the audience can write prompts on the glass, and they respond to it for improvisation. And then they came out of their little glass box and did a bit of a performance. And that same process of viewpoints, improvisation led to this work that we made. I'm Here Waiting, it was really interesting because the feedback from young people and teachers, people with young kids, like kids that age, 15 to 16, was like, oh my gosh, that is it. And then friends of mine at work who were 30-year-old males went, that is the worst, most boring thing I've ever seen in my life. Because they don't know, what it is to be a 15-year-old girl about Gambier, and it is boring. That was kind of the point. I think there's a photo here. They spend their time sort of just imagining what might be happening one we did a whole lot of image making stuff with kids in year 6 and 7 about travel, and they're imagining where they'd like to go, you know, if they could have any car, what it would be like, and then I made those into animations, and then the animations, a bunch of older people then turned into performance pieces. So, this image, and we did it in a shopping centre car park, thinking, oh, we'll just get people as they're doing their Christmas shopping. And we did, we got a good audience and people who wouldn't normally see it going, okay. So the learning curve that I undertook in delivering these projects was steep. I was yet to value my time enough or understand the role that partnerships could play in my work. I had budgeted fees for administration that were far under the real time required to promote projects. So although I had strong numbers attending workshops, excellent young performers involved in projects and good audience turnout, I tended to attract this due to a connection with me through my work as a teacher. At the same time as I was grappling with developing accessibility and administrative skills, I was also working on developing as an artist. I had trained as an actor and my skills as a director were forming. My strength was in facilitation and endowing participants with ownership of the work. But when it came to composition and performance, I knew I had a lot to learn. The quality of the work I present has always been really important to me. I saw each project as an opportunity to explore the way that a form could be utilised as a vehicle for participant output. It was also an opportunity for me to make better art, to push myself, to make work that was more thoughtful, more nuanced, more poetic, more aesthetically careful. However, I lacked the knowledge or skills required in design and directing to do this as well as I wanted to. So I worked to grow my skills in the area of directing and design, and in working in new areas such as physical theatre, projection and animation. Steve Mayhew continued to mentor me, suggesting professional development opportunities and placing me in other projects he was working on for local stages. One of these projects was If There Was a Colour Darker Than Black, I'd Wear It, the brainchild of John Crouch, a fellow Gambier, fellow actor and fellow high school drama teacher. He wanted to make a work in response to the issue of young male suicide in our region. Country Arts brought together John, myself, Jamie Harding and Gavin Clark, along with designer Indira Shanahan, and put us in a room together for a week to see what we came up with. We examined the ways that masculinity is presented in regional towns and what impact this might have on young men. This was in 2009. The work was presented for the first time at the Regional Arts Australia Conference in Goolwa in 2012. By then we had about 15 people working on it. It was performed in Mount Gambier and won the Ruby Award for Innovation in 2013 and is heading to Bathurst in a couple of months. This is a work that has been made largely by regional artists for regional communities. It is also an interactive work that sees the show become a resident of the town it is performed in. The process sees us work with young people in the town to create a world for the main character of the show. It's a show that I'm very proud of. By continuing the exercise of yes, let's in response to suggestions and opportunities, I continued to grow my methods as an artist. However, I found that as I was growing my practice, I was becoming burnt out. I was working full-time as a teacher and running workshops or rehearsals after hours and during school holidays. Over time, it took its toll. I felt like I was making art in a bit of a bubble. I would bring people in to work on a project, and then they would go, and I would continue alone. I was still flying the flag for contemporary art in the southeast, but it was difficult for people to get a handle on my work. When audience members would comment that they didn't get it, I would try and explain they didn't need to get it, as there was nothing to get. They were looking for some familiar narrative structure, anything familiar to hang on to. This is some of the Rising gang performing a viewpoints improvisation in the foyer of the Helpman Theatre before a big Mount Gambier event, the Mayoral Gala. We were invited by Council, a bold move by them. All the local dignitaries and culture types were there to watch local musicians and dancers perform a recital for the Mayor. People watching us were commenting, "What are they doing? What is this?" When one lady had the answer, "I think it's one of those cults, Janine. You know, one of those cults?" I'm not sure which of those cults in that Gambier practice movement improvisation, but I guess cults were more familiar than what we were doing. 2011, like a creative sabbatical where I would travel and get some much needed energy coming in. I applied for community partnerships funding through the Australian Council to work with Darwin Community Arts for a few months. I was preparing to start working with the newly arrived refugee community about Gambier and felt that I could learn a lot from DCA, where they have an excellent track record in working with people from non-English speaking backgrounds, as we just saw. Oops, oh yeah, that's everyone looking going. Huh? So my time at Darwin Community Arts was amazing. I was able to engage in a suite of projects where I could simply be an artist or facilitator rather than also being project administrator, publicity, money manager. In addition to this, Bob Ramillo was incredibly frank and generous in sharing his outlook, ethos and experiences. I was floored by the partnerships that DCA fostered, not only with arts organisations, festivals and funding bodies, but with organisations like the Submission Australia, Red Cross, local high schools, the Multicultural Youth Network and Life Without Barriers. This was a city where the arts were centrally placed in the big picture for service providers concerned with community and cultural development. I was inspired but also felt angry at how my work was valued in that Gambier. I felt like walking away from the fight. I expect that many of us here today are familiar with that feeling that although you know the value of the work you do, you're having to push really hard to make things happen. It was clear that Bong and others at DCA were still fighting the good fight and that they gained substantial ground. So to summarise, there have been a number of factors that have inspired me to work in the CACD sector. My love of art, coupled with my work as an educator, has certainly influenced me. I've been consistently inspired by the amazing people I've worked with, their humour, their creativity and talent, and I've continued to be supported in my work by Country Arts SA. I've also been inspired by the artists I've collaborated with and by the programs that I've seen running in other places. This combination of factors has led to me developing my practice. I am an artist who provides a framework for other people to unpack their ideas, feelings and stories and then leads them through a process that explores these to develop a new work. In doing so, the interests and art forms of the participants are always central to the project. This has seen me keep striving to grow into a multidisciplinary artist who can use a variety of forms to communicate. Through my learning and practice, I've developed a palette that I particularly enjoy working with. Things like physical theatre, dance, text, improvisation, image, animation and shadow puppetry. So now I'm going to briefly mention my current projects. I relocated to the Adelaide Hills in 2012. Currently I'm contracted by Country Arts SA to work on the Cultural Places program in the Alexandrina, aka Just Add Water. I'm working with Wet Paint Youth Theatre, mentoring their young tutor and working with them to look at programming and project management in a way that increases the artistic merit of the group's outcomes. I'm also supporting Strathalbyn Youth Theatre, a volunteer-led group. I'm supporting their tutors and organisers as they develop their workshops and program in response to community demand. This is just a couple of images from Wet Paint, the last show that they did last year. And then this is from Strathalbyn, from the Christmas parade, where we had a Mad Hats tea party on the street because they were doing Alice in Wonderland. In addition to this, I'm working on Lakes Angel, a site-specific cabaret for 9 to 13-year-olds set on the beach. Casey Van Seville has designed the set for the show, along with outlining the narrative and form. Susie Skinner and myself are working with him to develop the project more fully. Community engagement is central to our process in developing this show, and we are currently working towards a progress showing in Gambier in May. Through the Key Producers program, I'm in the first stage of research for a new work of my own. I'm exploring how headphone verbatim can be a live art experience, specifically investigating how we can have the experience of walking in another person's shoes. So, this brings me to my thoughts regarding opportunities and challenges as I consider the future for community arts and cultural development. And I feel like after the last speakers, I'm going to sound so naive, and it's what I wrote, so I'm sticking to it because I can't come up with anything else now. I get brain tired when I think about this. I see huge opportunities. I did mention before that I'm an idealist, so I'm just putting that out there again. I believe that art practice is a really effective means of addressing issues and priorities in education, health and social unity, the big picture stuff. I'm talking about the impact that participation in arts projects can have on an individual's sense of purpose, belonging and community, and in developing positive relationships. Affecting these areas in turn addresses prevalent social issues like wellbeing, mental health, crime and even suicide. Now I'm wary that I'm reeling off that list of social issues in a manner that sounds trite, and I know that everyone here has read and heard information, examples and statistics that support these ideas in a far more rigorous way than I can, and even just the last figures that we just heard. These issues that CACD practice can address are prevalent and important issues in Australia right now. A whole lot of money is thrown in the areas of health and social impact with varied levels of success, and not being successful in addressing such issues is very costly. CACD has the opportunity to become a bigger service and to show how art can make a real difference to people's lives, to their health, their future and to communities. There are companies and organisations that are doing this well already. There is an opportunity to learn from the trailblazers to work on developing the profile of the sector as a whole. I expect that some of them might be here today, and that might be part of what today is actually about. The big opportunity is for the value of CACD to be recognised outside our field, so that we are not fighting to make our work, but others are fighting to get our services. The challenge is in how we can get stakeholders to recognise the value of our work. How do we promote and sell our sector? How do we place ourselves centrally in the landscape of community development, health and social impact? When industry and government can really understand the role that the arts can play in addressing these big picture priorities, opportunities for the sector will flourish. I do believe this, even though I know what's going on. Another challenge is in how we develop best practice and grow professional community arts cultural development practitioners and artists when the field is not serviced by undergraduate tertiary education. Looking back at my experiences and learning, I see the importance of my training as an artist, my training as a teacher, and equally the ongoing mentoring that I received from Steve Mayhew and Country Arts SA. But this was largely luck and timing. Without any one of those key factors, I don't think I would be involved in this work. Something to consider is whether we need to work towards setting standards and benchmarks. This is a challenge. Diversity of practice and approach is key to the work we do. But if we don't strive for consistency in the quality of practice and outcomes, the sector won't get the recognition it deserves. A personal challenge for me is how to make a living out of this work, but that's just art in general, isn't it? It's not just CACD artists that grapple with that conundrum. I'm going to end with a quote from Steve Jobs from the Stanford commencement address in 2005. I think it kind of summarises the experience of being here today and how I feel about the future. And I'm hoping that by quoting him, you might remember me as a brilliant speaker. People say we only remember the beginning and the end of the presentation. So here goes. Try to be Steve Jobs. You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect somewhere down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.